But first of all, we'll begin with a prayer. And today is the feast day of St. Margaret de Youville. And she was the foundress of the Grey Nuns and the first first Canadian born person to be declared a saint, as she was by Pope John Paul II in 1990. St. Margaret was an accompanier and a compassionate listener, qualities we look for in those who sponsor our participants in RCIA. So let's open our time together with a prayer to St. Marguerite. This one, if you are familiar with St. Vincent, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul and the Canadian Vincentians, this is a prayer that they regularly pray for to St. Marguerite de Youville for their intentions. So we begin in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. St. Marguerite de Youville, you had a listening ear, a compassionate heart. Your life, truly a living gospel, inspires our actions. Lend us your eyes that we may discover the most urgent needs of our times. Lend us your ears that we may hear cries of pain and distress. Lend us your hands that we may dress wounds and alleviate pain. But more especially, lend us your heart that we may manifest God's tenderness through our boundless love. Beseech the Father to give us, as he did you, a dauntless faith, an invincible hope, a universal charity. Amen. Father, Amen. So thank you again for being here. A special welcome to Dr. Bill Klimig, our presenter this evening, and to Louisa Geets, coordinator on the lay formation team, who is really helping me out a lot with the breakout rooms and the technical side of this tonight. So thank you very much. First, though, before we get started, I wanted to let you know about the availability for ongoing training for your sponsor group in the art of intentional accompaniment. Sue Couton will guide groups through this 6-week training program. They meet once weekly for 6 weeks with her. And it's especially geared towards the journeying that a sponsor does with an RCA catechumenate or candidate. So it's helping them to develop those listening skills and techniques in accompaniment so that they really are journeying in a fruitful way with your RCA participants. So if you're interested in having your parish group participate in this, just drop me a line at my email, jwaldock@rcav.org, and Sue and I will work with you to set something up for your parish sponsors. And finally, please save December 2nd as a date for our M&O Advent Retreat. This is for ministry leaders, and it will be held here at the Pastoral Center. So keep an eye on your email for more information about that. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bill Klimig. He is the Deputy Director of the Catechetical Institute of the Franciscan University of Steubenville, Ohio. And he has guided the development of the Franciscan at Home platform, which many parishes here in Vancouver use for ministry leadership and formation. He has a long experience at the parish level as a Director of Religious Education and Master Catechist, as well as being a Director of the Association for Catechumenical Ministry and Managing Editor of the ACM RCA text, which several parishes in our Archdiocese also use. He is experienced in counseling as well as catechesis, and all this denotes what a blessing it is to have him speak on RCIA and sponsors today. So for a full bio, please listen to our last training session introduction. But for now, I'll turn our meeting over to Dr. Bill, and we can begin to learn more about the buddy system that is integral to RCIA process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jane, very much, Louisa, and thank you all of you for the privilege of your time this evening. Obviously, we're in different time zones because I'm in Ohio, so I'm way over in the Eastern time zone here, but I'm also obviously a good bit south of you and stuff like that. You just had your Thanksgiving a little while back, and of course, I had to research why the Thanksgivings are at 2 different times. Yeah, and I finally figured out why, because Canada, is much more north, and kind of all the leaves in your area drop sooner. You can have your Thanksgiving earlier because when your leaves are down off the trees, you can hit the turkeys, right? So we have to wait longer for our leaves to drop later so that we can shoot the turkeys successfully, because with the leaves up, we can't see them and stuff like that. So that's why that's why you can look that up on Wikipedia. I'm quite sure that that's the reason. So it's really just a joy to be with you. I visited your city, Vancouver, once when I was in the Navy as part of the visitors of the Battleship Missouri. When I was serving as a sailor on there, we visited your extremely lovely city and had a very interesting welcome there. And I enjoyed very much the time poking around your city. And I hope to return again, maybe to meet some of you in person and such like that. If that becomes possible at some point in the partnership, I'd love to come out there and do that again. But so it is tonight, we're talking about something that is relevant that Jane mentioned, sort of counseling stuff that I worked on, because tonight we're talking about things that have to do with what we could collectively call the pastoral aspect of the RCIA process, the OCIA process, which is a collection of things that I'll screen share with you, and you'll be given a PDF handout about shortly to kind of extend what I'm going to say and go a little bit deeper. But my mentor, Barbara Morgan, who founded the catechetics program here at Franciscan in the 90s, she had a phrase, many phrases, but one phrase she liked most was, remember, we're saved in bunches. Remember, we're saved in bunches. Now, what she meant by that was quite a number of things relevant to tonight, certainly. What she meant by saved in bunches that's relevant tonight is that no one comes into the church, no one stays in the church, no one comes alive in the church without it being about many others. And that isn't in the form of sort of the Thanksgiving that I referred to. In other words, kind of happy general celebrations of sort of ease and sort of family or friend enjoyment. When she said we're saved in bunches, she didn't really mean that kind of bunch, although of course that's beautiful and good, whether it's a Thanksgiving holiday or a parish picnic or bazaar, whatever. Those things are beautiful and good, but that's not what she meant. She meant a much more serious bunch. She meant more what the scripture refers to as iron sharpening iron. She meant more what it meant to be in a relationship of gentle but real accountability. She meant more what it was like to be in a relationship where the other person isn't just there to enjoy your company, but might actually more be there to walk with you in your pain, listen to you as you might dare to begin unfolding your messes and your struggles. To be willing to accompany you, as our Pope's favored word would be, in a pastoral way, which always involves risk, always involves sacrificial presence. So when she said we're saved in bunches, she didn't mean more the light fellowship. She meant more the intensity of a real self-gift to the other. When we say the pastoral aspect of the OCIA or the RCIA process, we mean all the people that could surround someone interested in our faith, an inquirer, eventually a catechumen or a candidate, all the people that could surround them to bear that gentle, sacrificial influence upon them. That's the bunch. So the bunch, you could say it this way, looks like this. So the pastoral components, as it says up top there, are the people who participate, some intimately, others more from a distance, in Jesus' work of conversion and discipleship. And this is who those people are. Stated sort of concentric squares in terms of closeness or intimacy. So obviously those in the middle are those closest or most proximal in the local parish, in your local parish. Furthest out, of course, would be the Holy Father, right? Truly our Father, truly a man who sacrifices and loves us. Truly a man we cannot do without in terms of him being the vicar and sign of Christ's presence. And then representing that ministry, the Holy Father's apostolic ministry locally, is your bishop, right? Who is a true shepherd. These words are chosen as words of intimacy, right? We don't use in the Catholic Church words that are CEO or company type phrasing. We don't say boss and we don't say head and director so much as we say family words are the native ones to our faith. Father, sister, mother, brother. And that may actually be sort of worth sitting in for a sec to realize that essentially what you're doing in the pastoral aspect is not just helping them see there's a whole bunch of tenets and truths that they should believe, they should follow, they should assent to, they should become docile to, so that they can move. Nor is it just welcome them into the beauty of our liturgies, the power, the grace available. Of course, it's those two things, the catechetical and liturgical aspect. But the pastoral aspect is more about making it clear that they're invited to a family, not to a club, not to sort of like joining the Lions Club or joining sort of the Glee Club, or this isn't what RCIA is. And that isn't obvious to people outside the church. That's the point, is that it isn't obvious that this isn't just a membership thing. It is the job of the team, the sponsors, the godparents, others in the parish to make it clear that what this is they're joining a family. And that means sacrificial realities are the norm, as it is for any family. And that means mess and struggle and lack of ease. That we're not having them come into the family for the sake of ease. We're having them come in the family because we need them, first of all, and because we intend to grow them, which is the mission of every family with its members. It isn't just like hang out, right? It's to grow. I have 6 kids, right? My mission with them is not to raise children. My mission with them is to raise adults. My mission with them is to raise them up and to send them forth. My mission with them is change and conversion and deepening and challenge and gentleness and love that goes along with that. And the RCIA process is to be the same tone. So the parish community obviously is the next in, and then intercessors. A word on that for a moment. So Barbara Morgan, she was, among other things, leading the academic stuff of the catechetics program here and stuff like that. But she also was the RCIA team director for the campus. And I was on her RCIA team for the 2 years that I was taking the master's degree. So on our local RCIA team, bringing people into the church that happened to be on the Catholic campus. So for Barbara, whenever you joined her RCIA team, and obviously by me mentioning this, I'm suggesting it, brothers and sisters, for you. She said, whenever anyone joined her RCIA team, and she had the first meeting with them and the first team meeting, she said, okay, you can't pray enough for yourself for this work. This work is too much at the center of the church's mission and too much at the center of Satan's gun sight. It is a battleground. You can't pray enough for yourself in this. And so what she said was, I require you, to her RCIA team members, I require you to obtain for yourself at least 2 intercessors. Now, obviously, there's lots of people that pray for us in our lives. And she was not meaning that that wasn't the case for us, but she meant more explicitly, she wanted us to find someone, whoever they were, that would pray for us weekly, explicitly, for our work on the RCIA team, to put a hedge of protection around us, a sea of grace moving forward before us, won by prayer, by fasting and sacrifice if the intercessor was willing. She let us pick the person, but she said, your criteria is simply this. I want you to find 2 people who will pray for you. They could be local to you or they could be in Indonesia. It doesn't matter where they are. Just, I want them to be 2 people who will pray when they say they will pray. who will pray when they say they will pray. Because you know that there's the other type, right? People that say, hey, pray for me. And you say, yeah, I'll pray for you. Then 2 minutes later, they forget and off they go and no more, right? Not that. People that will pray when they say they will pray, as we might call them, prayer warriors. She said, I want you to find 2 people like that in your life, wherever they are, whoever they are, wherever they are in your life. And they will pray for you weekly during the time that you're on my RCIA team. Because you can't pray enough for yourself for this work. That is a pastoral work. And it is part of the family surrounding. Now, the other aspect of the RCIA process, besides the team members and godparents and sponsors having intercessors, was that anytime we first got an inkling that an inquirer might show up, because as you know, sometimes you get ahead of time, like, oh, this person might show up this Thursday night or whatever. Whenever that happened, one of the team members was assigned to be what she called an intercessor coordinator. This is a person that one of their jobs on the team was whenever they got a name, like someone gonna come or actually coming, they would find 1 or 2 intercessors in the parish community for that person. Now, I'll mention it later, but confidentiality is important in the OCA process because people share their messes with you and they're not necessarily sharing it with the rest of the world yet or ever. So the intercessor wasn't necessarily an RCIA team member, usually wasn't, in fact. They were somewhere else in the parish community. And so it wasn't their right to know that person was present in RCIA, like their full name and such. So early in the process. Later, when the person went through public rites, if they went that far in the RCIA process, and they went through things like the first public liturgies, then that was made their presence known to the general community, and then it was fine. But in the inquiry period, before that had been done, before that step had been done, it was the case that we had to protect the fact that they'd chosen to come to RCIA, as you must protect the fact that someone chooses to come to RCIA, because there's a lot of reasons why people may not want others to know that they're looking into the Catholic Church, right? Anybody who is veteran in the RCIA process knows this well, that there are lots of reasons why people show up as inquirers that is not the time for anyone else outside that room to know they're present in that room. Whether it's family members that they're not ready to tell, or friends that they're embarrassed about, or whatever it is, it's their right to have confidentiality assumed in that room. So for the intercessor, we simply shared their first name until they did, if they did, go through a public rite, RITE. So they were told perhaps some very basic things, like we have an inquirer. His name is John. He's from a Protestant background, right, or something like that. Very simple in the beginning. And the job of the intercessor was to begin weekly intercessions for them and to continue. And the intercessor coordinator, to the degree they were able, would update those intercessors occasionally about the progress of John as he went through the process, so they could pray with some more focus. For instance, John, without, again, breaching confidentiality, John's been with us a couple of months. He's kind of struggling lately, just some family things. He definitely needs prayer in that direction, those sort of things. Part of the pastoral surround is very much the surrounding effort you make to make sure that prayer is robust. Because prayer works. Amen? Right? Prayer works. So it's not just our catechetical effort or our other things we do to try to be good and nice and welcoming. There must be a hedge of protection around these people, and it must be taken very seriously. Because as I said, this is the center of the church's mission. The heart of the mission of the church is evangelization. RCIA is its in full embodiment in the parish's life. And it is at the center of Satan's attention. Right? It begs prayer. I would say it this way, if I could say it as strongly as possible. To not have intercessory effort deliberately sought is irresponsible in Christian initiation ministry. Right? It's playing games, because Satan is very real, and people's weaknesses are very real, and the world is very tempting. So, intercessors, a very important part of the picture. And then inside here, further in, is of course the more proximal people that will be near them, collectively called the RCIA team and godparents and sponsors. So that would be the pastors and clergy, even if they're not there every night. Right? You'll be getting this PDF, by the way. You don't need to take notes on it. Pastor, clergy, perhaps a deacon or whatever. They often won't necessarily be there every night, but great if they can occasionally or whatever they can be. The RCIA director, obviously the person in charge, often a lay person or a deacon or somebody else besides father, and whoever is teaching. In my parish, the 15 years that I led RCIA in a parish community, we had a 10 to 12 member RCIA team most years. And about 4 of those people, besides father, who would visit, 4 of those people were catechists. They would teach in different ways, including me. So as the RCIA director. They're not all catechists. So what else do they do? More on that in a moment. The godparents and sponsors, which we'll mention more as well, they often are brought in fairly quickly in the RCIA process, depending on the circumstances of an inquirer. It's your choice, but I'll give you some principles for that. Discussion leaders, small group leaders, when you break out, obviously we're going to break out today into small groups. Discussion leaders trained to do so. Like you have access to the Catechetical Institute, which I represent and I serve as a deputy director. You have access to our workshops for free. One of our workshops is called Forming Faith Through Small Groups. That's a very good one to give to anyone who in any way is involved in the small group effort, because I have definitely experienced that you cannot take it as a given that small groups are productive and faith growing unless you train the facilitators. It should not be sloppy. It should not be assumed that people can sit at a table and facilitate a healthy faith discussion on whatever the topic has been that night or whatever you're talking about. People have lots of human failures that can be trained away as small group facilitators. You know, just again, simple cliche stuff. The sanguines, if I depict those temperaments, again, this is just sort of labeling cliche, but it helps. The sanguines, typically personality styles as a facilitator, will tend to talk too much. The melancholics will tend to talk too little, right? Not really kind of helpfully move things along. The phlegmatics will not as easily move to making sure each person participates actively. They're a little too laid back about that often, again, unless they're trained well, right? The cholerics will be sort of like too agenda driven in the circumstance. Like, here's our goals. We got to get to it. We got to get through these 4 questions, that kind of thing, and not letting it be natural. So again, that's cliche, but you get the idea, right? Is that our natural tendencies and temperaments war against us being excellent at something until our personalities are trained to be disciplined in those temperaments. And small group leadership, I found by long experience, you cannot take for given it will be productive unless the facilitators are trained. We have a workshop to do that, right? Forming faith through small groups that you can take people through in the RCIA process, meaning your team members, godparents and sponsors if they act in these roles, to do that. And it will help a lot. It will bring a lot of daylight. There's other types of workshops like building the mentoring relationship, empathic listening. You can write that title down if you want, or just find on the system. Building the mentoring relationship, empathic or empathetic listening, that teaches people to how to listen well in a small group context. That can be valuable, right? That sort of stuff. So there's help for this, not just exhortation, right? There's enablement there in the system to help move this forward that is reasonable and doable. So discussion leaders is part of the pastor work. Hospitality folks whose job it's a requirement in canon law that people going through the RCIA process get fatter, right? They're supposed to eat donuts or the gluten-free equivalent thereof. By the time they come into the church, they should weigh more, right? That's the job of the RCIA team, to kind of bulk people up as best they can, right? It's part of coming into the church, right? So hospitality is important. Barbara Morgan, again, I mentioned her, we're saved in bunches. She used to say, food is God's love made edible. Food is God's love made edible. And so it's important. We put, so in my RCIA process, it took me a while to learn but people like to cook stuff. Now, some of you here might laugh at me like, of course, Bill, people like to cook stuff. People like potlucks. That's why parishes do it all the time, right? But that was not a thing that was obvious to me. So for the early years, I just kind of had it in the budget, about $2,500 worth of it in the budget, to have food for the RCA process throughout the year kind of done nicely, not like super catered, but, nice stuff, more than donuts, something nice and healthy, perhaps fruit, all this, and stuff that was a nice variety. So they felt welcome. But after a while, I learned that the RCA team, once I got a veteran team with me, someone, that they wanted to help. They wanted weekly to cook stuff. And so that made it like way better, because an RCA inquirer coming in, like after a couple of weeks, they vibed that all this food stuff that was laid out, that a lot of it was homemade. And that made them feel rather loved. The people would go to that effort for them every week to make just something simple and nice, maybe some cookies or whatever, or, some pigs in a blanket, whatever it was, just something simple to make them feel loved. And after a couple of months, I noticed in years following that it wasn't long before certain RCA candidates and catechumens started to manifest that desire for potluck joy, and they would bring their own stuff, right? So the candidates started bringing things as well, and that made it even more wonderful, and that made it kind of like more family-like, right? And so the food thing, the hospitality thing, is not coffee and donuts frivolously. It's something that you put effort into, because it actually is communicating a way you are. This is a place of joyful abundance. This is a place where the welcome is not minimal. This is a place where we spread things out because we take joy in receiving you here, right? We'll all gain weight together, right? That sort of thing. So it's doing that. The hospitality stuff is not a sideline. It's a major role in the team to help with that. And then, of course, someone perhaps, depending on the size, if not necessarily necessary, sponsor, intercessor, coordinator. They could be the same person or whatever. There's lots of roles that could overlap. A lot of people in my team were all of these categories. They might even be a catechist, a discussion leader, someone who helped set up and break down, and maybe had a job like a sponsor coordinator. So it's not like these have to be separate people. Now, the godparents and sponsors as a group, okay, they are the most intimate buddy of the buddies, the surrounding, the Saved in Bunches group, because that's the person that is just there for that one inquirer, not the team who's there for everyone, but the person that's there only for that single person, that one person they're there for, right? The closest one. So now you can hear me say by implication that you're trying to pick a godparent or sponsor who could show up to the RCA group. Now, does that happen every case, every year? No. Do you strive for that? Yes. That's the point. And remember, canonically, someone can have two sponsors, right? Two godparents, like a godmother, godfather. There's two lines in the sacramental stuff for that. So it's often the case that someone may, if they're kind of like more into the vibe of what a godparent or sponsor is, they'll want to pick their own or consider that or suggest someone to you that might be good for them and that might be a family member. It might actually be someone at distance that can't come because they're out of town permanently. And you don't have to say no to that as if it's an either or, because someone can have two godparents. So they can have that person they want that may or may not able to be present and may therefore not be a decisive factor, pastoral element. But you can add a parish sponsor. You can add, right? You can also have someone that kind of plays that role early on as more of a surrogate or what do you call it, a quasi sort of sponsor, someone that isn't going to necessarily go through the rites with them, but is there in the room with them, for them, kind of acts in that way. Sometimes team members sort of behave this way. They become someone very important to particular candidates. And I'll show you the reason why in a minute that evolves. You could say they're sort of proxies in a sense, for a stronger Protestant or a stronger sponsor that isn't able to be present, right? They're kind of acting as proxies by being more personal to a particular person regularly. So, but what you're looking for, as you well know, there are canonical requirements for godparents and sponsors, which I won't deepen in. You can look that up. But it's obvious stuff. They should be a full initiated Catholic with no barriers for marriage sort of issues, annulments pending, that sort of thing. They should be someone that practices their faith. They should be someone, when practicing their faith, means that they're faithful to the church, not moderately faithful to the church, but serious about sinning less each day. Someone that takes the call to sainthood seriously. Because their primary role, as it is with infants, is to be a companion on the journey that isn't about the programmatic aspect. They're the person that will persist past the process that ends in mystagogy in the neophyte year. They will be the figure, hopefully, that will persist in their life. And therefore, they need to have a sort of independent temperature of their own, so to speak, as someone who is a clear, good witness, as a godparent and sponsor. And that's why it's often important, you saw I said a role for a sponsor coordinator, that you're kind of always on the hunt in a parish that gets a fair number of inquirers, because it may be a substantial work, for people in the parish that might be able to fill that role. And it's not like they couldn't do it more than once. But that kind of role is someone that you hunt for in the parish that are willing to do this sort of thing, and hopefully willing to come to the RCIA sessions, because so much more is possible when the godparents and sponsors show up in terms of pastoral movement of that person. They're hearing what that candidate or catechumen is hearing. There's nothing that replaces the value of that pastorally. Now, as a quick screen share, otherwise, it was mentioned in the call that I led for 9 years the Association for Catechumenal Ministry, ACM. This is their website. And it was during those years that we published resources that are still in publication and still used in thousands of parishes in about 28 countries. One of the things we published in those years remains in publication, and that is this resource here. It's like $7. It's cheap. It's meant to actually be given to the godparent or sponsor. Although if you just wanted to get one copy and get a lot of guidance out of it as a team, as a director, if you're a director, you can just get one copy and learn a lot about what godparents and sponsors are supposed to be for these folks. So this little thing, Godparent and Sponsor Handbook, the website is acmrcia.org. acmrcia.org has these resources on it. So we published these years ago along with other helpful things. If you're a real nerd, we all should be real nerds. You have actually tabs on your Bible. And if you're like a super nerd, you have tabs on your catechism. You can get catechism tabs, like Father Michael Schmidt, right? Father Mike Schmidt, he says there's catechism tabs. Now, if you're like an uber nerd, you have tabs for your rights book, your RCIA rights book as well. And here they are, right? You have all three tab sets for your catechism, your Bible, and your rights book. So there's that. We have stuff in Spanish if that's relevant. And just to swim by it here, there's stuff that you can look at later for the participants themselves. This is a collection of handouts, just a huge collection, 380 different handouts on every possible thing they could want or need to know in the RCIA process. For the participant, the godparent, the inquirer. Obviously for catechists, this has like 60 session plans in terms of the things you teach. And then the leader's manual, which is kind of like the soup to nuts on everything you could possibly need to know to do this process well in every possible regard, as well as lots of free stuff in the back of like bulletin insert suggestions and all these sort of things. So that's just a quick tour through these publications, having pointed out the godparent and sponsor one tonight as the purpose. Okay. So what I'm saying here is introductory, is sort of like a touch on the godparent and sponsor role and excellent training of them. So what I'm giving you, besides just the encouragement to dive into this more deeply, is this suggested book, the Godparent and Sponsor Handbook, which will result in what is usually very poorly done, which is training godparents and sponsors. Right? Rather than just tapping them on the shoulder, having them assigned and hoping it goes out okay, is being deliberate about the training. So we had faced kind of like earlier in this, like suggested ideas of sort of how do I want to improve my RCA process? And there's a million ways to do that, and a million things you could focus on, and a lot of stuff you could do. But one of the most important things you could do as a parish is decide that, okay, maybe the coming year, we're going to substantially make effort to train godparents and sponsors once they're identified, rather than just kind of spin it out and hope they are good. So to point, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, our bishops' conference in the US, did a study of the implementation of the RCA process about 10 years after the rite was promulgated, about the year 2000, to sort of see how it was going. Now, I could say a lot about this, and I will say more about it in our future sessions together, but they pointed out deficiencies for implementation that were serious. There's no difference between the US and Canada in that regard. The deficiencies are the same. I won't spend this whole page on it, but I will point out to you the 3 deficiencies they found in the pastoral aspect, because that's our focus tonight. The things that made the process not work well, helped people not stick, helped the process fail. These are the pastoral things that they pointed out in the study. Sponsors are not used effectively as a decisive pastoral element. Okay, that's what I was just describing. They're kind of picked, but they're perfunctorily used. They're not trained for, they're not brought to the RCA sessions often or ever. They're just kind of assigned and there, show up, put the right hand on right shoulder at the right moment in the rite. Is that right too many times? Right? And that's kind of their role, and then they're sort of like they float off and they're gone. Right? And they're not in any way sort of helped by the parish. That's one thing that hobbles good Christian initiation. The next thing, the lack of a solid team structure, capable of creating a consistent, what's the purpose of a team here? To create a consistent environment of supportive fellowship, right? Saved in bunches, the serious version, and a nursery of conversion. The lack of a supportive environment at the parish at large is also an issue. In other words, the parish is like, who are these people? Why are they relevant? Nobody ever talks about them. They just kind of show up at some rite at mass and there's no preamble and no follow-up. The parish is barely aware they exist. That, in other words, nobody's welcomed them into the family or talking about the larger family or to the larger family. There's no effort there. One of the things, for example, the leader's manual that I pointed to has in the back in its appendix is all kind of stuff to mitigate that. Like, how would you talk to the parish about this? What would you put in the bulletin? What would you say from the pulpit? What would you do in the pre-announcement to a rite to kind of like, who are these people? What would you say? It has all those suggestions in it to sort of like, how would you surround them properly in this regard? And the last thing, which is not something we'll put a lot tonight, is the pastoral aspect, is an improper balance in the clergy-lay relationship in the RCA process. Balance meaning this, if you took the 2 extremes, you either have, again, these are extremes, that you either have an RCA process that is like father instructs a catechumen or candidate privately. No team, it's kind of like sit down, we'll talk doctrine. And as we'll talk doctrine until I think you're ready, and then we'll initiate you someday, right? And get you in that way. Sort of a private introduction, fully clerical, no team in view, no microcosm of the parish family present to that person, no rites usually done, just kind of private instruction. That's one extreme with the priest. The other extreme is the team, the lay team of laity, without any clergy ever in view. They kind of like you go through the RCA process and it's kind of like hard to even spot the fact that there are actually priests at this parish because they never show up in RCA. I've had priests tell me, because I've worked with thousands of priests in this regard in RCA process, I've had priests tell me that it can be side of like a lay capture of the RCA process. It can evolve that way, unfortunately, where he like says, you know, like I kind of feel sort of unwelcome, the pastor speaking, kind of unwelcome in my RCA room because the lady assumed it's sort of like it's their thing. They've like got ownership over it. And I feel like extra fifth wheel when I come in, like, okay, we're just kind of like, hi, Father. Bye, Father. You know, that kind of thing. That happens to priests too. So it's the opposite of the clerical sort of thing. It can be too much laity. So the USCCB, the Bishops' Conference, is pointing out a lack of implementation is a lack of health, is when there's a clergy-laity imbalance. Now, what I more pointed to was whether you have deacons, and certainly priests, that it obviously depends on their busyness, their availability. That's not an imbalance, that's just a logistic issue. It's not anybody trying to push anybody away. It's not Father trying to keep a team out of the process. It's not the team trying to keep Father out of the process. It's just the fact of busyness. That's okay. You just do the best you can with that. But at least Father coming in and doing a couple of teachings, coming in and visiting with some sense of regularity. The way I used to handle it as a director of religious ed for those 15 years, each year for the pastors that I had, I served 5 pastors during that time. I would, before the RCIA process began, I would sit down with Father and I would say, Father, here's the teachings that we're laying out, that we're going to do this doctrine, this, baptism this night, grace, different things. Please let me know for your calendar and for your desire what topics you want to pick. And gave Father first pick. And some of the priests that I served, they picked 2 things and that was it. Some of them, they were in there every month, like once a month. They'd pick 1 teaching each month to do. It varied from pastor to pastor that I worked with. But the point was, I gave Father first pick as the RCIA director, sort of like what teachings will fit to your calendar, Father, which teachings you would love to do. Like priest, I would love to talk about the Eucharist with them, or I would love to give the talk on confession, or whatever it is. And you involve them in that way by, if you can, following the line of their desire. Because everybody has sort of favorite teachings, or ones they feel like they do more of a zinger job with, or ones they just love to share passionately. And those are the ones that they should do. They can do any ones they want to do, but they ought to be present in the room as a source of passion for whatever they're teaching, right? So that's the way we used to handle that, to balance that out. Okay, so clergy-laity balance. So those 3 things, the pastoral elements, those 3 things repaired become your aiming points. You could say, how do we make sure our RCIA process isn't poorly serving people? Okay, well, these are the things that are talking about. Sponsors, godparents, used well, as I've described. The lack of a solid team structure, and that's where I'm going next, and improper balance of the clergy laity. So the team. I mentioned some things about the team. By the way, this part of the handout, I'm going to leave for you to explore yourself. It's deeper than what I'm able to do verbally. It gives you more stuff on this, on the pastoral aspect, the importance of confidentiality in the process, things like that, okay? So it's very good, and it goes through each period what pastorally should be going on in each of the 4 periods: the pre-catechumenate, the catechumenate, P&E as we like to call it, purification and enlightenment, which coincides with Lent typically, and mystagogy, the neophyte year, the first full year that they're Catholic, and the first 7 weeks of it in mystagogy, right? And then a summary. This is all from the Rites book. So what I'm giving you here, though, on the screen is a sample agenda for an initial team meeting. What this does, again, you'll get this handout. You can use it or not use it. That's not the point. The point is it's a comprehensive 1-page sort of window into what an RCIA team is for. Because it is not a given that your parish has an RCIA team. It doesn't have to be 10 or 12 people like it was for my parish. It can be just like 2 really good couples that seek to love folks well. It can be whatever it is. But the point is to have as best you can, a microcosm of the church present in the godparents and sponsors and also team members, that who is this parish family? And an itsy-bitsy version of it is present in the room for the Christian initiation process, the team. It's an itsy-bitsy version of what the larger parish family is. Okay, so this is an initial team meeting, meaning what would you do, like opening it up? I don't have time to go through this in this context, the whole thing tonight, so I won't, but I want to point out some certain things. Qualifications of a team member. Like, who should you be if you want to be doing this? Okay? Be converted to Christ and his church. Be docile to the church's mission. Be punctual and flexible. Desiring to continue your own formation. You're not playing games with the fact that we're all sort of done somehow. Openness to new relationships, right? Now, I'm a melancholic introvert. That's a challenge for me, but I can make myself do that, right? And, rather than us like a sanguine or somebody or an extrovert that's like, okay, give me new people, hoorah. That I'm like the opposite of that. But it's important for a trait of a team member that they're open to new relationships. Openness to questions. I've definitely encountered people that are sort of like an enemy of questions. Like, I like to teach you, but please don't ask me questions because I'm not actually interested in what you would say to me about what you think I've taught. Right? Not those kind of people. Openness of your life as a witness of faith. More on that in a minute. Prudent and able to keep confidentiality. Barbara Morgan was very serious about this in our team. She basically said, and I'll, make more direct eye contact by stopping screen sharing. She was very serious about this. You should be very serious about this because people's lives, sometimes there are titanically important reasons why no one should know they're in the RCIA process or the things they eventually share with you. So Barbara said it this way. She made us promise in our first team meeting. She said, what you will hear from these candidates as we kind of work through grace to crack open their lives, what you will hear from these candidates is some serious stuff. Annulments and stuff, or histories of types of sin they unfold to you and say, help me, whatever, struggles and abuse that they might have had, whatever, lots of stuff comes out. A good team brings it out because it's what love does, saved in bunches, taken seriously, right? So Barbara used to look at us all in the eye, like really deliberately make eye contact and intensity. And she said, I want you to promise me eye contact for each of you. That what you hear in the RCIA process this year as team members, you will take to the grave. And that's what I would expect here. There's no other answer. Right? To do serious pastoral work means you take confidentiality deadly seriously. Okay? It's important to cover in the team and to be crystal clear, never assumed. Okay? So people who can keep confidentiality. So the nature of the RCIA sessions, I'll leave for you to read. It's a later thing that we'll talk about more. Kind of like, what's the tone of the first RCIA night? This is like you're saying to the team, this is what we're going to be like when the people come in first. The way we're going to share ourselves, the tone they're going to come into, the nursery of conversion, as one theologian put it, the RCIA is supposed to be. You're coaching the team. This is what it's going to be like. This is what we're supposed to make it like. Okay? This sort of thing. No commitment, no cost, no participation. Spouse is welcome if a spouse wants to come, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All this. You can read this on your own. Very, very clear that this is the tone of the room. This is what it looks like to create a nursery of conversion. Okay? But what I wanted to roll down to here and point out is this. So this is what a team does. You say, what's the purpose of the team? Well, yeah, generally pastoral service. But specifically, some are catechists, as I mentioned. There probably should be an intercessor coordinator, regardless of the size of your team, someone in charge of doing that effort, as I've described. Sponsor coordinator, likewise, as you grow. People that help with setup breakdown. Practically speaking, that was everybody on my team. Hospitality and food. Practically speaking, that was everybody on my team. Although some were those that were stronger and put the tables up and stuff like that in the school hallway where we met in the school library, right? There were some that kind of like got there a little bit earlier to make sure everything was set out nice so that potluck stuff could have a landing spot. Someone that was in charge of the library. Now I don't have time for that. I don't mean like a whole library. I mean like maybe a box or a set of things that you put out that is very zippity-doo-dah, few resources that are really good for people that come into the church. Just a few things. And kind of runs that and always lays it out nicely, encourages people to take stuff for free if they want. Small group facilitators. That'll often be most people on the team. Again, a trained for position. Reflection on the word facilitator or breaking open the word is another term often used that we're not going to cover tonight, but that's a liturgical action that is leaving partway through the Mass after the liturgy of the word for those that are not baptized to go out and have, in a sense, a discussion session on the readings. Reflection on the word, it's called, or breaking open the word, separate from the RCIA session. Music, if someone does music. For many years, we didn't have any musicians, so we did a cappella singing. Poorly or not, it was done, and we enjoyed it. It was fun. We sometimes laughed if we were all off key together. But sometimes you'll have someone that likes to do the music and begin a session, close a session with a guitar or something like that. right? Something to bring in a touch of beauty, maybe a piano if there's one in the room or whatever. Music, we always sang. A liturgy coordinator, a retreat coordinator, such stuff is needed logistically. Usually that's the RCIA director that would do that. It was for me, so there wasn't a separate person, but it might be a separate role. So I'm going to make sure the RCIA rights, which we haven't talked about, that's a future session with us here. The RCIA rights go smoothly, logistically, that's set up right, name tags, all that stuff. Someone just think through those things. Remind people of stuff. Remind the sponsors to show up. Retreat coordinator, someone you should do. We usually did 2 to 3 retreats each year with our people. We usually did it prior to the rites, prior to the rite of acceptance and welcoming, prior to Lent, the rite of election, and prior to coming into the church. We usually did 3 retreats, and then sometimes afterwards as well in the mystagogy neophyte year. So someone that might take care of that stuff logistically if that's something you can do or want to do. Okay. So these are the roles in the team. Now I mentioned up here, openness of your life as a witness of faith. This is kind of where I wanted to end out. This is a 2-pager that you have on giving a personal testimony or witness in an RCIA setting. And it's very practical. Like how to give a testimony, this is. What to do, what to avoid. Questions to help you consider how to figure out your content. What is a testimony for your life in the RCIA process? This is very pragmatic. I find that this sheet is very effective when used. You have it, it's yours to use. So what's the purpose here? Okay, so this is perhaps the most important thing I'll say tonight. All RCIA team members, whether they teach or not, all sponsors and godparents, as long as they're showing up in the room, should be asked and should do their testimony at some point in the RCIA process. They should get up prior to a teaching, usually after the music. Hi, we're here, everybody's here. And it becomes a pattern till you're done with it, till you've gotten through everybody. This is done early in the RCIA process, very deliberately, for everybody to give their testimony that's there present as a pastoral figure. Why is that important? It's like critically important. It does several things. Again, this isn't about who teaches or not. Everyone does it, even the shy team members. And you have a page to give them to help them figure out what to say. Okay? I have found that cradle Catholics, especially people born Catholic, don't do a good job in testimonies if they're not coached to it. What you end up with if you don't coach to it is please get up and give a 10-minute testimony is more described as sort of a life bio, not a testimony. Well, I was born in Toledo, and when I was in 5th grade, I went here, and then in high school, I went here, and that kind of, anyway. Lots of extraneous details that testimonies are not made of. It's more like a life bio than a testimony. A testimony, to nutshell it, answers 2 questions. How did you get hooked to Jesus? How did you get hooked to his church? And why those things will never change. That's what a testimony answers. How did that happen to you? Because what you're doing in the Christian initiation process is you're showing a pathway. Because they have had lots of examples in the world, the inquirers that are coming to you, of wrong pathways to God, or no pathways to God, or dead ends to God, or fake pathways to God. What they need to see through lives of saints, through witnesses that you bring to bear in other contexts, through the presence of their godparents and sponsors' testimony and your team's testimony, what they need to see is lots of pathways that are real. How does God show up when God shows up in a life, as opposed to all the fake versions that are out there? What does it look like in many ways for God to actually show up in a life and for that life to become open to him? What does that look like when it really happens? Because they need to see pathways to follow. Again, whether that's saints' lives brought to bear in that way or your lives on the way to sainthood brought to bear in that way. Testimonies are critical because they show pathways that are real. Messy, fine, but real. That's critical because they need to begin on that pathway themselves and need to know what it looks like when the real thing happens. The second reason you do testimonies is early, like one each night through the pre-catechumenate process as you can. Having godparents and sponsors do it once they start to show up, once you bring them in, once they become part of the process, is they are looking at you in the early process. They're looking at you, candidates and inquirers, through like slats. They're not seeing you clearly yet. They've got slats like, well, I think maybe the Catholic Church teaches this and that's crazy. I'm not sure about that. Or I'm not sure what these people think of me. Maybe they're like crazy, kind of like, what is a Catholic? Are they ignorant of the Bible? Are they crazy people and radical? They have lots of barriers, lots of misconceptions, whatever it is that the world has done to them to misinform them, to misguide them, to misdirect them about what the real offer is of the gospel, about what the real Catholic Church is like. It's like blinders. Testimonies begin bringing down those blinders one life at a time. Because remember, when they show up, think about an inquirer. You're anonymous to them. They don't know you. They don't know what you think of them. They don't know what you're going to be like. They don't know if you're safe to kind of like unfold something to, or dare to share something to, or even to stick around and come back the next week to. And you have to break that down quickly. The quicker, the better. Nothing breaks it down better than testimonies. Because they can't be asked to take the initiative, the inquirers, because it's not fair to say, hey, tell us your life story to a bunch of random strangers. That's not fair. That's not a viable pastoral request. You have to take the lead and unfold your lives to them humbly, gently, right? Because a testimony isn't you as the hero story. The testimony is what God has shown up and done with you, for you, overcoming you. It's a God story. You have no right to its privacy, in a sense, to a degree, if I can say it that way. It's God's story in you, right? It's meant to be given to others. It's why it was given to you. You were drawn so that you could turn around and draw others. And your testimony is your primary mechanism of what has God done. So a 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute version. My dad was on my RCIA team. He was 95 years old by the time he died. He was on my RCIA team till he was 95. There was no way he fit his life testimony in 5 minutes. It just didn't work. So 15 minutes for dad, right? Whatever, a short testimony of that sort of quality. Because what that does in the room, it very quickly opens people up to you. Because suddenly you become, on the other side of a testimony that you've given to all those inquirers, you're a known entity. The small groups very quickly become higher quality once testimonies start to be given, because they know you then. They begin to sort of like enter spaces of trust with you. They begin to say, okay, maybe these people, I could start to unfold something that I've been struggling with. They won't do that unless you take the initiative. And that doesn't happen casually. It happens deliberately through testimonies. That's why everyone in the room gives it, not just the catechists, because you need to open your lives to them so that they can then in turn open their lives to you when they're ready, in the way that they're ready. Testimonies establish that. It gives them pathways. It breaks through the awkwardness and helps them begin to see who you are and feel your welcome sincerely. Testimonies are critical. It's a pastoral element. Okay? So now, having said that stuff, you all have all these handouts. The last thing I'll point to before you go into your breakouts, and we'll do a quick Q&A at the end to the degree we have time. I wanted to, again, come into the process. The last thing I'm giving you in here, I'll just point to it, is this 2-pager. It is Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who's fairly famous. He's basically saying, what would I say tonally, actually, as a first teaching to someone coming into the Catholic Church or considering it? What would I do? What would I say? I give this to my team. I'm giving it to you because it creates the accurate mind of the church in the tone of Christian initiation. What are we saying we are? What are we inviting them to really? To not leave it to chance. Read this sheet and you'll see Mother Church's heart on this is the welcome. This is the family's voice. Okay, so I'm giving you that as well. All right. So I think breakout rooms for now would be the next step.
Very good. Thank you. I just really spoke to me because as I came into the church, the witness of my sponsor and the testimony of my sponsor was a pivotal moment in my conversion. The capacity for somebody my age to be able to give voice to how God was impacting their life within the Catholic Church made all the difference. So I can definitely speak to the importance of that. Louisa has put in the chat the breakout questions, and we're going to split you into groups now for about 20 minutes. You're on your own. We're not going to come in and lead those groups. So please have an engaged discussion, and we'll be back with any questions in about 20 minutes.
Good godparents and sponsors together, are they the same thing, or is there a difference between a godparent and sponsors?
I'll give you the Latin answer and the practical answer.
Okay.
The Latin answer is the same word in canon law, patrinus, for godparent or sponsor. But the practical answer is that typically godparents are given to those that aren't baptized. Sponsors are given to those that would be, for example, our Protestant brothers and sisters coming into the church that are baptized. So a sponsor is used for a baptized person. A godparent is used for a non-baptized person. But in terms of, obviously there's some difference of which rites they go through. You know, there's differences in the rites of whether you're baptized or unbaptized. But other than that, the ministry itself of being a parent in God, a sponsor for bringing you forward, is the same ministry. In other words, what you do with them, how you serve them, the presence you have to them, whether they're baptized or not, is still about gentle pastoral presence.
We had a woman in our group ask for her sponsors, godparents. She has two men in her life that are kind of inspiring her to continue learning the faith, and was like, I know the church isn't really keen on having two godfathers stand up there at the front when she gets baptized, but considering she's coming in through RCIA, would she be allowed to have both of those men as sponsors?
That typically depends upon the local guidance of the bishop, if there is guidance. Sometimes there's not. Typically, that would be, for most bishops, considered atypical. That wouldn't be normally what's allowed, although there is variability there. Usually for someone who's being baptized, you would be having a godmother and a godfather, and it would be expected to be one of each gender. With sponsors, it's a little less clear. Most people, of course, assume you only have one sponsor. That's the typical assumption, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. But there is local variability there, and you just ought to check with your bishop if there's guidance in that regard. At least pastorally speaking, though, one of them could be, if there are canonical barriers or bishops' barriers to that, one of them could be the sponsor, and the other simply act in a sponsor-like role, even if right hand on the right shoulder and the ceremony never happens. Right?
Okay.
That's irrelevant.
Well, this particular woman she's a catechumen. She's not she would be getting baptized. So in that case, it sounds to me that it's the godfather and godmother. Yeah.
Right. Yep. And again, the other person can be pastorally decisive and present in that sort of way, but not officially designated liturgically and put in the sacramental record book. There is a question in the chat that says, when is the best time to introduce them to the Mass? So I think next time or the time after that we're together, we'll talk more about the catechetical stuff, which is not tonight's topic. But generally, the point is that you can bring them to the Mass whenever you want, early as possible, to begin at least witnessing the first part of the Mass or the whole Mass, depending on what your capacity is. Because many parishes can't take them out partway through the Mass with a facilitator. They're not logistically being able to do that. So early as possible, yes. There are handouts, for instance, that you can give through ACM or other things you could find that give them the basics of what the Mass is in a nutshell. It may be some time, teaching-wise, though, before you get to explaining the Mass. But it's okay for them to begin coming because God shows up in his own way through the Mass, right? It isn't all about, our personal human explanations that make it all roll. Grace rolls without that sometimes, and that's okay. So it can be a both and. But you typically don't explain the Mass until you've finished unfolding the kerygma, which might be months into the RCA process, before you kind of get around to the kerygma and then unfolding the enablement to the kerygma, whose heart is the Mass. There you go.
Just curious, how long did your RCIA sessions run typically?
Hour and a half. Sometimes, practically speaking, they went 2 hours because people showed up early to chit chat and have fun and stayed later and chit chatted. But officially on the schedule, hour and a half. Other questions? Adrian?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cumming. In a typical catechetical session on a RCIA evening, the teaching segment of an evening, how much time would you spend on that in your hour and a half?
It varies according to when you are in the process. Again,
okay.
When we talk about the catechetical aspect, but early on, you're making more room for a testimony, as I mentioned, in the pre-catechumen. And your teachings are sort of a little bit shorter because you can't quite presume they're kind of like in deep. So maybe like a half hour would be the typical time frame on average that you might do, plus a testimony. Later in the process, in sort of what we call the flesh on the bones period, which is the catechumenate period, the one that would be after the pre-cat and before Lent, that's the strongest more like 45 minutes, sometimes even the bulk of an hour or close to an hour, if you've got really good teachers that can hold them like that. Right, that depends on the quality of the teaching, but 45 minutes would be common in that time. For purification and enlightenment, though, it can shift radically. And again, I don't want to steal the thunder from the next time we can go deep here, but Lent is a whole different animal of how you do the teachings. So the time frames don't quite apply in quite the same way. More on that next time we gather. But so it is variable through the period, but roughly half hour to 45 minutes would be the nutshell.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
I have one. I hear that sometimes the regular parishioners will be brought into the RCIA meetings, sometimes for their own personal formation, but often in the hopes that sponsors will emerge from those regular parishioners coming in. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so this is the idea of sort of like making RCIA general adult ed as well, kind of a twofold purpose in the room. So, okay, I understand the motivation. I was a DRE for 15 years. I get it. It's very tempting to use the RCIA process as general adult ed because it's one of the few places where you do a soup to nuts walkthrough, very attractive, food and the whole thing for adults. And it's attractive to kind of throw other people into it because it's a rare thing. It takes a lot of effort to do that. And it's very comprehensive and ongoing. It's an awesome thing to be a part of. Having said all that, I get it. It is not a good idea to have people who are not team members or godparents and sponsors in the room with catechumens and candidates for two main reasons. One, it totally fuzzes confidentiality. You can't presume confidentiality on people there for their own reasons, right? Well, good reasons. It's fine that they're motivated to be there. That's fine. But they can't be asked to be confidential in the room in the small group or something when they're not a decided part of the team. See what I mean? Okay, so it kills confidentiality. That's problematic. Just as problematic. So think about the fact of we'll talk about this more last time, especially in the pre-cat, or more next time in the pre-cat, about how to work for questions, how to get them out of their shells, how to get them to be curious. We'll talk about that. So that when you have a mixed group of people who are there for other reasons, totally gets fuzzed as well, totally gets messed up. Because if you have Catholics there that are invited to sort of like, hey, ask your questions, or sort of like this, or in a facilitator circumstance in a small group, hey, let's discuss, the Catholics, because one, they're always more comfortable than the non-Catholics. Automatically. They will tend to ask questions more easily as a group on average, those type of people that are Catholics in the room. And two, they have different kinds of questions, sometimes even axes to grind, which aren't helpful in the RCIA process in this kind of way. So if you let them ask questions, people that are there just for their own needs and growth, they will tend to dominate the Q&A because they are usually the ones to ask the first questions and the last questions, and the questions in the middle, they ask their questions because they're more comfortable and they have more readily the language. Sometimes inquirers are just quiet and don't ask questions because they don't know how to phrase it. We'll talk more about that last time of why people don't ask questions, right? But you shut it down even more if you put people in the room that quickly jump to their questions, their agendas, their issues that are Catholic stuff. You don't want to do that to the RCIA room. You really hobble your pastoral ability to draw people out if you put other Catholics in the room that aren't team or godparents and sponsors. It shuts down the inquirers in a very important way. Okay, so that.
We have one last question in the chat, if you're able to address it quickly. If not, I'll get some information from you after and forward it to Margie. She asked about if you can explain a little bit more about the 2 or 3 retreats.
Yeah, just simply, again, we'll cover this next time because it's catechetical, but doing retreats prior to each of the major rites is essentially a discernment action. You're letting them sit more deeply. It's often the context in which you can discuss more deeply than you get to in a little 20-minute small group in an evening. The stuff that they need to sit on more, which is choice to go through the rite and things like that. So, but it's also the reflection, right? You're reflecting on a major movement in their life that's about to happen if they go through this rite. And it allows there to be prayer in a reflective way, which just can't happen in a typical RCIA night in some parish library or wherever you have it. You know, to bring them to a chapel, to bring them before the Eucharist, to bring them before a place where they can sit for a while and be quiet. RCIA sessions are active things, right? They're busy places. They're not contemplative spaces, at least not for very long in any given evening. And retreats allow for what only happens when you give the Lord more time and more intentional time. Different things happen to souls. So we'll talk next time and kind of like, what would you do at an RCIA retreat? There's a lot of variability is the bottom line. You know, there's a lot of variability, but the point is to give them the chance for the Lord to show up in a more contemplative context.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Bill, and thank you, Louisa, for helping with the technology. And we'll close off our night here. Just a reminder that our next guide training will be on November 20th. Please pre-register. When I send out the link to the registration form, please register again and register for each of the trainings so that we're able to easily give you the link to for the Zoom presentation.
Mm-hmm.
We will, it's very late for Dr. Bill. Thank you again for accommodating our time zone. Mm-hmm. And thank you for an amazing presentation on the buddy system and on the pastoral aspects of the RCIA. Just so important for us to hear and to reflect now on how we might integrate that into our own processes. So we'll close with just a simple glory be. In the name of the Father and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Glory be to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Thank you for the privilege of your evening. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Blessing to us.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
you.
Bye.